Welcome to the September 26, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. I'm Blandy Miller, Chair of the Commission. Before we begin, I'd like to address 3 changes to the agenda today. The first is an early stop time. Today's meeting will end early with a hard stop at 11:15, as described in new business item E1. This is to accommodate a City Council meeting in these chambers beginning at 11:30. The second is a deferral of 2 cases listed as new business items 8 and 9. That's rezoning cases Z2723, the Dawson Assemblage, and Z2923, 8113 Ligon Mill Road. Given the early adjournment, we will not have time to hear these cases today. So without objection, I will defer these 2 cases, Z2723 Dawson Assemblage and Z2923 8113 Ligon Mill Road, to our next meeting of the Commission on Tuesday, October 10th at 9 a.m. in these chambers. I'd also ask staff to give these 2 cases priority at the beginning of that agenda. If you are here today to speak on either of those two cases, please instead return on October 10th or send us an email with your comments. All emails will be part of the public record considered by this commission in making its recommendation. The third change in new business to the agenda is new business item number 10, Z3523 at 0 Gorman Street. This case, without objection, this case will be moved to agenda item E5 under new business. We will then proceed with the remaining 3 cases listed on the agenda that have not been deferred. Given the short meeting today, I would ask everyone to please be efficient in your comments and avoid redundancy so that we can hear from as many viewpoints on as many cases as possible. Moving on to public comment, we start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on an item not contained on the agenda. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on an item not contained on the agenda today? Seeing none, I will move on to the consent agenda. There are 2 items listed today. The first is to defer case Z8421 to our October 10th meeting, and the second is approval of the minutes. Is there any debate or discussion on either of these items? Seeing none, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. Do I have a second? Commissioner Fox has seconded. All those in favor by show of hands? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to old business, there's 1 item today, rezoning case Z2523 at Pool Road. We first heard this case at our September 12th meeting, where we received a full staff presentation and applicant presentation and heard from the public. The case was deferred to this meeting to allow the applicant time to submit revised conditions. I will turn to Sarah Shaughnessy for a brief staff presentation focusing on any updates since our last meeting.
Good morning. So a reminder, this is a rezoning request for currently zoned R6 conditional use. The request is for neighborhood mixed use, 3 stories conditional use. It was last discussed at your last meeting, and your deadline for action is November 11th. Since it was last discussed, the applicant team has added 1 condition prohibiting parking between buildings and Pool Road. That's the only change in this case, so I'm happy to answer questions, and I know the applicant is also here.
Thank you very much. We have already received public comment on this case, so just so I can get a sense, by show of hands, is anyone here today who wishes to speak on the proposed changes or any other aspect of this case that we have not discussed previously? Seeing none, I will bring it back to the table. Any questions or comments from the commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
So I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated September 26, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. The recommendation also includes an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Bennett has seconded. Any further discussion or debates on the merit of the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to new business. These requests have not appeared on a previous planning commission. Well, they did appear on a previous planning commission agenda, but we have not heard a staff presentation on them. So we will hear a full staff presentation and applicant presentation, and we will also hear from the public. Item E1, as discussed at the beginning of the meeting, this meeting will end at 11:15, and as a result, we have deferred 2 cases, new business items E8 and 9, to our October 10th meeting, and in addition, item E10, the rezoning case at 0 Gorman Street, will be moved to new business item number 5. Moving on to E2, rezoning case Z2023 at the block bounded by Hillsborough Street, West Street, Morgan Street, and the railroad. This case is to rezone approximately 1.12 acres from downtown mixed-use 12 stories shopfront to downtown mixed-use 40 stories shopfront conditional use. The deadline for action is November 11th, 2023. We will now turn to city planning staff for a presentation from our newest member of the team, Margaret Tartala. And I'd like to welcome Margaret, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Margaret Tartala. I'm with City Planning, and I'm going to be presenting case Z2023 today. The site is at 501 Hillsborough Street, and the request is to rezone about just over an acre from downtown mixed-use 12 stories to 40 stories. To orient you a little bit to the site, It's between Hillsborough to the north and Morgan Street to the south. If you can picture where Hillsborough and Edenton run together, that's where the site is. West Street is just to the east of the site, and the railroad is just to the west. And it's about a block west of Glenwood Avenue, where it dead ends into Morgan Street. The deadline for this action is November 11th. Most of the zoning in this area is downtown mixed use, ranging between 12 and 40 stories. There is some neighborhood mixed use and office mixed use a little further west, mostly west of Boylan Avenue. Here's an aerial of the site to get you a little better oriented. Like I mentioned, it's between Hillsborough to the north and Morgan Street to the south. It's just north of Morgan Street Food Hall and about a block west of Glenwood Avenue. This is a street view of the site. Right now, the buildings on the site are one-story structures. There's a surface parking lot on the southwest corner of the site as well. There are two proposed conditions for this rezoning request. The first limits some of the uses. It prohibits things like a jail or vehicle uses. The second condition would require the owner to put $40,000 for 1% of the approved dwelling units into a fund for the city's affordable housing program. This is a summary of what would be allowed under the existing versus the proposed zoning. The proposed zoning would increase the number of dwelling units allowed by about 3.5 times, so from 230 to just over 800, and it would about triple the allowed office square footage. In terms of the transportation analysis, the site is in a spot that's very walkable and bikeable. There are several transit routes. Combined with the proximity to jobs, it makes it an ideal candidate to add density and height. This is a map. There's 4 Go Raleigh routes that serve the site and 1 Go Triangle route that runs on Hillsborough Street. In terms of affordability, most of these factors are remaining the same because the designated zoning district isn't changing, it's staying downtown mixed use. But again, it will add to the number of units by about 3.5 times. Also, it doesn't include subsidized units, but that second proposed condition will add to the affordable housing fund for the city. In terms of demographics, this area is generally less diverse and higher income than the city overall. And the rents in the area have increased quite a bit more than the city overall, so about 41% for this area compared to 25% for the city overall. So that indicates that there is demand for more units in this area. The requested rezoning is consistent with the future land use map designation of Central Business District. The shopfront frontage is also consistent with the urban form designations of downtown and frequent transit area. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. And there are several comprehensive plan policies that are consistent. I have 2 slides. I'll let you look over these for a minute. This is the first slide. And the second. No inconsistent policies were identified. Again, the deadline for action is November 11th. And if you don't have any questions, the applicant is here.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Moving on to the applicant and those in favor, you have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Chair Miller, members of the commission. Toby Coleman, 150 Fayetteville Street, here on behalf of the applicant Hennepin Ventures. I don't have a ton to say, and I think given y'all's tight timeline, I won't belabor the point. I think this is one of those blessedly short ones. I thought it would just be useful I put together this slide. It shows recent 40-story rezonings in the area. So you guys, last year, the block with the roast grill on it, which is just to the east, was rezoned. You can see there's a series of other rezonings. The Rust Bus was sort of the first 40-story in this area. We do have included a affordable housing condition. Specifically, the way it reads is for 1% of the approved units, there will be a donation of $40,000 for those 1% of units. It's similar to what was done with another recent downtown rezoning. Basically works out to $400 per unit of a donation. Happy to answer any questions or concerns.
Thank you very much. If there are any other members of the public who would like to speak in favor, please come to the podium. Seeing none, we'll move to the opposition. Those opposed to this case have a total of 10 minutes to speak. Seeing none, I will bring it back to the table. Any comments or questions from the commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Otwell.
Thank you, Chair Miller. I'd like to point out that this property falls on a route designated as a bicycle connection in map DT3 for downtown connections in the comprehensive plan, and the corresponding policy guidance says that along these corridors, bicyclists should be given equal priority to the vehicular traffic flow and other street functions, including but not limited to parking and loading functions. So I understand that staff has not had any explicit requests to fulfill this policy, so I still plan to vote in favor of this rezoning, but I encourage the applicant to work with staff as much as possible before this comes to council and hopefully address that policy.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to respond to that request?
We are, as Commissioner Otwell mentioned, we have talked with staff, and I know Bradley is here today, and he can probably give some insight if they've, we had a conversation 3 weeks to a month ago, Bradley, where we said, hey, what do you want us to do? And I think staff's been taking a look at that. So we, as Commissioner Otwell said, we don't have specific guidance yet, which is why we haven't offered anything up. But we are eager to hear what staff might guide us to do if they need anything outside of the right of way. I think that's the question for protected bike lanes, things like that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bennett?
Just a general question about the affordable housing condition, and I appreciate that. Actually, Toby, it's for staff. Is there these rezonings that are putting aside money for the Affordable Housing Fund, is there a way that we are targeting where those funds are spent? It would be nice, because I think the other one that had a condition like this was also downtown. So it would be nice if the funds are targeted to where these rezonings are occurring or where units are being lost versus, maybe further out in other places.
That's a great question. At this point, to my knowledge, we have not received any payments from any of these conditions. So I don't think that we have necessarily been incorporating them into our planning. I think your question about how will the city allocate and assign those funds once they're received is a good one. At this point, I don't have good information about how that's being planned for.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the commissioners?
I just have a question on, it's good to see that funding included as a forethought, but I'm just curious how what calculus went into choosing that number in particular, about 40,000 of 1%.
Happy to answer. As I understand it, and Bynum or David York may have other thoughts. My understanding from prior conversations I've had with Larry Jarvis is that the sort of standard gap funding amount for affordable housing units is $40,000. And so that's where that $40,000 number comes from. And so the concept is the city would pay, if you did 1% affordable, the city would pay $40,000, could potentially pay $40,000 in gap funding. A lot of times you don't do that in private development, but that's sort of the concept there. The reason for gap, for an offer of funding as opposed to offering affordable in a 40-story tower, is just because of the cost of construction. When you're building in concrete and steel, it's far more expensive per unit than if you're doing a stick built, so you can't get as many, just the yield and the bang for your buck isn't as good, both from the development and the city side.
Thank you. Other comments, questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Lamont.
As for your design, can you go over one more time what the intention is? And yeah.
For the building, you mean? Well, so this is a case like some others you've seen where, frankly, Hennepin Ventures got hit by the not credit crunch, but the rise in interest rates. So they at least had a site plan approval. They may have actually had plans to build a mixed-use building with shops on the bottom floor and apartments for, I think, up to 11 stories, although I'm blanking a little bit on that. And we're ready to move forward until, basically interest rates spiked. And as a result of that, they really couldn't get bank, there's fewer bank options. The cost of doing so just skyrocketed. And so they've been sitting out waiting to redevelop the site. And as they did that, they said, well, let's increase entitlements because that will give us the ability, in addition to apartments, to potentially add in a hotel, offices if office comes back, that sort of thing. So it's actually, the goal is not been set in stone, but the idea would be to add additional uses on top of what they already planned, which is about 290, 300 apartments.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Fox.
I move to recommend approval of case Z 2023 as it is reasonable and in the public interest. And I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated September 26, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Commissioner Haber has seconded. All those in favor by show of hands? Any opposed? One opposed? That motion passes 8-1. Moving on to item E3, rezoning case Z2123, 1501 Kirkland Road. This case is to rezone approximately 0.46 acres from R4 with special residential parking overlay district and special highway overlay district 2 to residential mixed use 3 stories with the special residential parking overlay district and the special highway overlay district 2. The deadline for action is November 11th. And we will now turn to Hannah Reckow for a presentation from the city.
Good morning, Hannah Reckow, Planning and Development. So this is a request to rezone one parcel. It's just under half an acre from R4 to RX3. There's 2 overlay districts that are requested to remain on the site. And so this is an area that has kind of a mix of residential and mixed use zoning in the surrounding area, a significant amount of industrial mixed use zoning along Kirkland Road, and then farther south, sort of pockets of residential and RX3 zoning. So zooming out, this site is south of downtown, just south of I-40. Kirkland Road intersects with Lake Wheeler Road, and this property is on the south side of Kirkland Road. Surrounding area, like the zoning, is a mix of residential and commercial and light industrial in this area. So zooming into the site, there's one detached house on the property currently, frontage on Kirkland Road. You can see to the west is a multi-unit housing development. Also, these are one of the only residential uses on this, on Kirkland Road. Some views of the site. You can see the house there on both directions on Kirkland Road. This request is for a general use district, so there's no proposed zoning conditions. The request is just RX3. And the change here is from a residential district to a mixed-use district that permits primarily residential uses. So lifting of some limitations on residential, much smaller setbacks that are allowed, and so a higher yield of residential units. So the surrounding context, this site has an average walk-in transit score than the city average, lower bike score than average, and good proximity to jobs and lower transportation costs. The job proximity likely influenced by the commercial uses that are around it on Kirkland Road, and then up Lake Wheeler Road, there's the farmer's market and some other uses there that may be affecting that. One bus route, L7, serving in the area, it is south of the site on Carolina Pines Ave, so east-west route there. So this request would add to the number of housing units that could locate on the site. No guaranteed subsidized units, but the change does permit a variety of housing types, smaller lots and units, and is within walking distance of transit. Demographics and land use history, the site is in a census tract where the residents are more likely than the city average to be racial minorities or low income, and the median rent has increased faster than the city average, 35% since 2016. So future land use map guidance for the site is office and residential mixed use. RX3 is consistent with that designation. And then the site is within a mixed-use center on the urban form map, which would recommend a frontage of some kind. So in the absence of that, the request is inconsistent with the urban form map, but consistent overall with the comprehensive plan, consistent policies. It's increasing the compact development, the variety and amount of housing that can locate on the site, and is requesting a district that would limit retail use rather on the site. And then the one inconsistent policy, this is from the Dix Edge area study, which is saying that urban frontages should be applied in the study area. This is located in sort of the south part of the study area, doesn't include an urban frontage, so that inconsistent policy is noted as well. And that concludes the overview. Your deadline for action is November 11th.
Thank you. Now moving on to public comment. The applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Chair Miller and members of the Commission. Randy Herman from the law firm of B.A. Folk, 5000 Center Green Way in Cary, here representing the applicant. There's a couple of context things that I wanted to add real quickly, and I'm not going to take a whole lot of your time on this. The first thing I wanted to point out is if you look just south of this site, that RX3 CU area, that is owned by the same owners, the Lavani family. That property was rezoned about 2 years ago with the intent that it be developed as townhouses. So this property does not directly touch that because there's an intervening property which has kind of a weird L shape. But other than that, it's being considered basically as part of the same project. So the intent for this parcel is to develop one block of townhomes that will be then both kind of making sure that the idea works and also serving as models for the larger blocks of townhomes that will be developed on the RX3 CU part of it. The other issue that I wanted to address real quickly is the frontage. The main reason that we didn't assign an urban frontage is because of the way that the orientation of the parcel is. So right now the frontage is on Kirkland Road and is pretty small. Once the property is actually developed, what you're probably going to see is, let's see if I can draw this, like a block of townhomes, and then basically a combination road and parking going along the side of that. So the actual frontage of the building will not be on Kirkland Road. It'll be kind of inward. And so we weren't sure that the urban frontages exactly worked in this case. But we think it'll accomplish basically the same idea. So that's pretty much all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions that members of the commission have. I will say quickly, we had a couple of neighbors who appeared at the neighborhood meetings. Their main concern was several of them were residents of this parcel, which is one of the last naturally occurring affordable housing areas in that part of town, and we're concerned that this would affect that property. We assured them we don't own that property. We're not doing anything with it. We don't have any intention to do anything with it. And so that was their main concern, and that was really the only issue that was raised.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in support of this project? Seeing none, we'll move to the opposition. Those opposed to this case have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And seeing none, I'll bring it back to the table. Questions and comments from the commissioners? Perhaps, yes, Jennifer, sorry, Commissioner Lamon.
Again, just a summary of the intention of the site.
Yeah, it's intended to be developed for a block of townhomes, so probably 5, 6
For sale or rented product?
for sale, yes.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commissioners? Commissioner
So,
Fox?
question for staff. I'm going to ask you to have a crystal ball, Ms. Recco. I'm trying to imagine, is there a scenario where a frontage could be applied to a townhouse, essentially what I'm guessing would be a side facade, not a front entry, as they just described? And what frontage might be appropriate there, were we to request one?
I would have to take a look at the UDO briefly. You're saying how would a frontage apply to the sort of side of a townhome development?
Well, it would prohibit the side of the townhome
That's my
because there would
question.
have to be an entrance.
So it's a distance and an entry required on that face, but the remainder of the block of townhouses could front what essentially worked as a drive.
Yeah.
Okay.
There also might be a build to, so they might have to percentage of build to.
Percentage of build to, yeah.
Has to be, yeah.
I guess that answers my question. My concern is the lack of frontage in this area where we just recently completed an area study. However, its applicability specific to this project, I'm not entirely sure is warranted.
Thank you, Commissioner Peeler.
We just had one 2 meetings ago. I believe it was Z1423 just across the street, and I think we had similar questions about the frontage. And I can't remember off the top of my head what conclusion we came to about that. I mean, I know we approved it, but yeah, I just remember the frontage issue was also something we discussed. So.
Question.
Commissioner McCrimmon?
Question. How will the frontage impact the current residents that are living there now that we're bringing up this subject of the frontage, and how it's going to impact the future homes
On the site?
on the site?
So specifically urban frontages have, there's a few of them, they have additional requirements for development. Most of them are, specifically urban frontages do prohibit parking between the building and the street. So either on the side or on the back of the building. There's requirements for pedestrian street-facing entrances and connections, certain streetscape requirements, and then usually a build-to, often a build-to arrange where that building can be. So generally bringing the building closer to the street and filling out more of the width of the property.
So will it impede the current residents that are living there?
There's one detached house on the property currently. I'm not aware with certainty if there's someone living there, but in general, to develop the property would probably require that person to move if there is someone living there, just logistically speaking.
Thank you, Commissioner Haver. Oh,
Somebody else. similar concerns with the frontage, and to be consistent, we do bring this up pretty regularly, understanding the size of the parcel could make it somewhat cumbersome to just apply that overlay. But I'm thinking of the condo development over behind the Merriman Wynn House on Polk Street, where they created that interior courtyard, and they did a very similar thing on those corner units. They sort of pulled up and there's an entrance and then the rest of them. And so I think, agreeing with Commissioner Fox, we just did a study. I would like to see if the applicant would at least take a look and work with staff to see if, again, I don't want to hem them in by just overlaying the urban form on it, but if there could be an added condition that could mimic that, I would be interested in seeing if that could work.
We're certainly happy to look at it. I think one way to get at this would be to add a condition saying that you can't have parking between the building and the road, because that obviously is one of the main concerns, is you don't want to have parking in front. I don't think there's any intention that there would be parking between the building and the road the way that it would be developed. So we're happy to do that as a condition. That would be one way of getting at it. The other way would be to see if it is feasible to have, again, the end unit have a walkway onto Kirkland and then have the rest of the units face. And that would be a conversation we'd have to have with the engineer and see if that's feasible.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's something the applicant's willing to consider if we hold it at the table?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Yes. Commissioner Lampman.
Just a exploratory question for staff. What is I'm assuming it's city-owned, like just a small sliver that runs alongside it there that I'm seeing on iMaps. What is that in particular? What's the purpose there?
Yeah, there is a strip of right-of-way on the east side of the property. I don't believe, and transportation staff can correct me if I'm wrong, there's any plan to build a street there. And I can't speak to the history of it, but yeah, there is a strip of right-of-way.
Would that impact anything on the developability of the site or anything that the applicant needs to take into consideration for that parcel at all?
Without a street developed there, I don't believe so.
And to the applicant, I think you mentioned that the family owns another, it's on Bates Street, right? Would that be
Bat Street,
the
yes.
ultimate connectivity to Bates Street to
Okay,
Bats?
yeah, so let me give you a little bit of background. That was the original intent. So Bat Street also is not really a street right now. It's a dedicated right-of-way that is not even really gravel. It's basically like a dirt strip. The intent, I think, at some point was that basically would connect like this and would be a road. But like I said, Bat Street is not developed. The part that is up adjacent to this parcel actually was right away that was closed by the city about 10, 15 years ago. It still shows up on iMaps, apparently because the property owners never actually went through the process of doing a new plat and conveying the parcels and all that. But yeah, the right of way was abandoned by the city.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. Just a general comment, not really for the applicant, but knowing that the adjacent parcel is naturally occurring affordable housing and understanding that there might be some pressure on that property from all the new development going on around it, it would be nice, and perhaps this is something that happens anyway that I just don't know about, if the city had some sort of, I don't know, awareness of the properties like this that might be experiencing development pressure and could somehow work with those property owners to keep those properties affordable. I have no idea how that would work, if that could work, but it's just being aware that these naturally affordable occurring, you know what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I'm congested today. That these properties exist and that there is development pressure if there were a way to identify them, and maybe there is, and some sort of, I don't know, displacement index or something to recognize that there is a lot of new development going on around them that could put pressure on those properties to flip. And if there were some way we could work with those property owners with our various funding mechanisms to help them, it would be nice. I don't know if it's possible, but it would be nice just because they are disappearing. And I know preservation of affordable housing is one of our priorities.
Thank you. Other comments, questions from the commissioners? Seeing none, without objection, I'm going to hold this item at the table and defer it to our October 10th meeting to provide the applicant more time to review some questions with staff and provide updated conditions. Thanks, everyone. Moving on to item E4, Comprehensive Plan Amendment, CP 523, Hillsborough Street Plan Amendment. This is a privately initiated request to amend map T1, the street plan, to change the street designation of Hillsborough Street between Youth Center Drive and Western Boulevard. We will turn to Hannah Reckow for a presentation from city planning staff.
All right. So this is a request CP 523. It is a privately initiated request to amend the comprehensive plan, and specifically the street plan, map T1, for a portion of Hillsborough Street from between Youth Center Drive and Western Boulevard. This is the segment in yellow. This is on west of downtown. Clip, you can see where Western Boulevard is, where the future BRT extension would be. And then also I've noted the location of a prior rezoning request, Z3422, located at Youth Center Drive. Here are some images of how the street is currently built out. Starting at Youth Center Drive, you can see it's a 3-lane, 1 lane in each direction, and a turn lane. It then does sort of transition to 2 lanes, and eventually at Western Boulevard, 4-lane divided. So you can see a portion of it is already built out to the current designation of 4-lane divided. So this is what the street map currently looks like. The teal stripe is 4-lane divided. You can see the busway where the BRT will be, eventually to the south. And then it is this segment here that is requested to be amended to an Avenue 3-lane parallel parking. So some images to help you understand what that means. So Avenue 4-lane divided, here's the cross-section. You can see 2 lanes in either direction, a median that makes it divided in the middle, sidewalk, bike lane behind the curb. It's 109 foot right-of-way, requires at least a 6-foot sidewalk. Avenue 3-lane parallel parking, as the name entails, is 1 lane in either direction, either a 3rd turn lane or median in the middle, and then on-street parallel parking, and then again also a behind the curb bike lane and sidewalk. 95-foot right-of-way, so a little smaller, and then a larger sidewalk is required, 8 feet. In terms of sort of analysis, the staff report notes a few policies this would be consistent with, and none that it would be inconsistent with. One thing I'll mention is that in the backup you can see the applicant has cited traffic counts, recent traffic counts, and guidance in the comprehensive plan for what streets can serve that number of traffic counts. So they've aligned sort of pointed out that the projected trip count is one that a 3-lane road could serve. And with that, your deadline for action is in December. So there are quite a few meetings, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Moving on to public comment from those in support. The applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair Miller, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Ashley Honeycutt-Terrazas with Parker Poe, here representing the applicant, Fairfield Residential, the developer of 5200 Hillsborough Street. And I also have with me Nate Boquin from McAdams, transportation engineer, who did the memo that you have in your materials related to the projected traffic counts and the comprehensive planning guidance on which road sections can handle those, projected traffic volumes. If I could. So just a brief history of this request. This was done very much in concert with transportation planning staff. And I know Monique is here as well. She can answer questions. So right now, from the star there, Youth Center Drive, all the way down to Western Boulevard, where Hillsborough Street runs into Western Boulevard, it's designated as an Avenue 4-lane road. We're requesting to move that from to an Avenue 3-lane divided, really to accommodate the future pedestrians and the future growth, more walkable area close to the Western Boulevard BRT. Again, Z3422 has that urban limited frontage. Fairfield Residential's project there on the corner is going to be developing with that urban street wall, urban limited frontage. And so this street section would accommodate more pedestrian activity, and really kind of conforms with what the comprehensive plan says about urban limited frontage, that parking is accommodated on street. And like Hannah mentioned, we did the analysis, and the future trip generation doesn't require those 4 lanes, which is really intended to move more cars through quickly. We want to make this an area that's more walkable. So again, where the orange is, that's the section that we're talking about from Youth Center Drive down to Western Boulevard. These are the proposed street section versus the current planned street section. And as you can see, and as Hannah highlighted, really there's not a ton of differences, but the most important ones are that larger sidewalk, less, smaller, fewer travel lanes, so really trying to prioritize the pedestrian here in this section that already has some small-scale commercial uses that we would hope would develop with more density, and the city has planned to develop with more density, more walkability in this area. And just to show that really quick, some excerpts from comprehensive plan maps. There on the left is the future land use map. Again, we're wanting to encourage neighborhood mixed use here, more walkability mix of higher scale residential and commercial uses, and then where Hillsborough runs into Western, that community mixed use. And as you saw on the zoning map, the northern side of Hillsborough Street there already has that NX zoning. Some of them already have the frontage, and so this really is consistent with the future land use map, urban form map there on the right. Again, in that frequent transit area, the BRT area as well on this little section of Hillsborough Street. And these are the policies that Hannah mentioned that staff found consistent with the comprehensive plan, no inconsistent policies. And we respectfully request that you recommend approval of this change to the street plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in support of this project? Seeing none, we'll move on to the opposition. Those opposed to this case have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And seeing none, I'll bring it back to the table. Questions or comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Otwell.
Thank you, Chair Miller. I have a quick question for transportation staff or planning staff. I'm not sure who will be able to answer it. What does this mean for the portions of that road that have already been built out to a 4-lane? street plan, would the development require them to bring that in, bring the curb lanes in, or do they get to keep what they got?
Good morning. I'm Monique Guyant with Transportation. So for the areas where the right-of-way is larger than the redesignation, those right-of-way extents would remain. They would not have to bring in the curb or make any adjustments to the laneage to narrow the road.
And the road layout would remain the same? It would continue to be 4 travel lanes? It wouldn't bring it back to the parking, parallel parking? So the curbs stay there, but will the current configuration of the lanes remain the same with redevelopment?
Depending on the frontage of the site, I believe they would work at site plan with the reviewers to see what kind of changes to the operation of the street can be made at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lamon?
Just as a disclosure, I am an alternate board member of the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance. I have not heard anything about this case, and I have no financial gain at all from this project, so I believe I'm still able to participate. I'm very familiar with this area, however, and I really like the concept. I think there's a couple of other stores along that area that would benefit from this scaling. I think that bridge is the railroad, correct? And I know that there's a tremendous amount of construction going on over there. So what has the engagement been, even, to work with a railway and getting that, because I would assume that bridge would need to be widened to allow for cars to go underneath. It seems impactful for a small section. Again, I like it. But the construction that's already underway, how will all that fold in together? And I don't know if transportation or if planning staff or whoever wants to try to tackle that discussion.
Hello, Monique Guyant again. Can I ask for clarification what section you're speaking for the construction?
So this piece right here, right now it's used as a detour route as well, while Hillsborough is under construction by the state fairgrounds. So I've had to wind my way through there quite often now. So all of that is currently planned out. It's under construction. It's already going to look like X. It's kind of a little bit in the previous question here is like how will all of that fold into this development of this section, and then how would that impact, because any sort of engagement with a rail line is challenging. So how is all of this going? How does that impact what's being done, and how is it going to be proposed going forward? How's that going to be planned out?
So I would believe if it's plans already done, they're constructing, any future development would require like some kind of transition to the existing conditions, which the existing would be the road that's under condition, because by time this development would come along, the current construction would be completed by then. So a transition would be required in this area to merge the two cross sections. As far as moving downward to the section that passes under the rail, that is a pinch point, and any kind of widening would be required to coordination with the rail and would be subject to their approval.
So essentially, the applicant of Z34 2022 would anticipate this, they would accommodate their development to accommodate this potential change, which may or may not be funded, may or may not be completed.
I was just going to say, I think, to your point, and I see, obviously this goes under the railroad track that kind of goes over Hillsborough Street. I mean, even today, if somebody were to develop, not Fairfield Residential, but those property owners and a future developer, they would have to, even today, they'd have to figure it out with the railroad about widening that right of way. So it's something that whoever develops that little corridor of Hillsborough Street, like this request doesn't impact the need to work with the railroad, like when this little strip is developed.
But the stretch that's under consideration here is from Western to the
Yeah, like Youth Center Drive. So it doesn't go in front of
Yeah.
the fairgrounds or
Right.
any of that. Yeah, just right there where those little businesses are. And then I think eventually this whole area would be more of, I know it's kind of industrial there on the southern side, but I think the idea is eventually it'd be more like a neighborhood mixed-use, walkable mixed-use.
And what was the coordination with those neighbors? Like everyone kind of along that route there?
I know that there was engagement during the rezoning, but as far as like this request change to the comprehensive plan, we didn't, there's no neighborhood meeting required.
Thank you, Commissioner Fox.
Is there a mailing required for a comprehensive plan amendment?
For a future land use map amendment, there is a required mailing. However, staff's practice has been to do mailings for street plan amendments too. So there was a mailing
Okay,
for this item.
that's helpful.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Fox?
I'd like to recommend approval of CP 523 as it is reasonable and in the public interest and supported by comprehensive plan policies related to coordinating transportation investments with land use, developing transportation in support of walkable neighborhoods, bicycle and pedestrian mobility, and pedestrian infrastructure.
Thank you. There's a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Bennett has seconded. Any other discussion or debates on the merits? Seeing none, all those in favor by show of hands? Any opposed? That motion passed unanimously 9-0. Moving on to item E10 that we're moving up in the agenda. This is rezoning case Z3523 at 0 Gorman Street. This is a case to rezone approximately 17.88 acres from conservation management with special residential parking overlay district to RX3 green conditional use with special residential parking overlay. We will now turn to Margaret Tartalla for a presentation from city planning staff.
Good morning, Margaret Tartalla with City Planning, and I'll be presenting for rezoning request Z3523 at 0 Gorman Street. Just to orient you a little, this is about a quarter mile south of the intersection of Gorman Street and Avent Ferry between Lake Johnson and Lake Raleigh. There will be a better map later on. So this is a request to rezone just a little bit less than 18 acres from conservation management with a special residential parking overlay district to residential mixed use, 3 stories, green frontage, conditional use with SRPOD. The deadline for action for this case is November 25th. The zoning in this area is predominantly conservation management and R10. There is a little bit of mixed use up along Avent Ferry, and there's some lower scale residential to the southeast of the site. Here's an aerial of the site. You can see a little better where the site sits between Lake Johnson and Lake Raleigh. It's bounded on the east by Gorman Street, and as I mentioned, it's about a quarter mile south of the intersection with Avent Ferry and Gorman Street, and about half a mile north of the I-40 interchange. Most of the surrounding uses are moderate scale residential. There's several apartment complexes. Up at the intersection with Avent Ferry, there's a shopping center that has a Food Lion and a Walgreens and some other commercial uses. And then again, there's some single family down to the southeast. It's sort of hard to tell on this map, but also Walnut Creek Trail runs from Lake Johnson along the northern boundary, not within the site, but just north of the site. And the Walnut Creek Trail Greenway runs along the creek there. So the site is currently undeveloped and forested. These are some views from the northern and southern ends of the site. There are 4 proposed conditions. The first restricts most uses that are normally allowed under residential mixed use, but still allows multifamily residential. The second condition requires that rents for the dwelling units on the site be an average of 60% of the area median income, so affordable units. The third condition will limit the dwelling units to 140. And then the fourth condition will require that the developer build a greenway connection between the site and the Walnut Creek Trail. Here's a summary of the existing versus proposed. Right now, the site is conservation management, so no development is allowed. The rezoning request would allow 140 units. And with the green frontage, it would have a build to between 20 and 50 feet from Gorman Street. In terms of the transportation analysis, the site is pretty equivalent with most of the city in general. It has a slightly higher walk score because of the proximity to the shopping center at Avon Ferry. It has about average bike score, about an average bike score. There are marked bike lanes along Gorman Street, and then it has a slightly higher proximity to jobs. There is one Go Raleigh route, Route 11, that serves the site. There's a stop currently at an apartment complex just across from about the center of the site. In terms of the affordability analysis, this will add affordable units. It doesn't permit a variety of housing types, but the housing allowed is multifamily. The area is generally less diverse and lower income than overall, and rents in the area have increased slightly less than the city average, about 20% versus 25%. The requested residential mixed-use zoning is inconsistent with the future land use map designation of private open space. The green frontage is consistent, though, with the urban form designations of frequent transit area and transit emphasis corridor. The request is overall consistent with the comprehensive plan, although it is inconsistent with the future land use map. And there are several policies, mostly around affordable housing and developing near transit, that are consistent. So there's 2 slides. I'll let you look over these. This is the first slide. And the second. There are a few inconsistent policies, namely, it's inconsistent with the future land use map, and then open space preservation. The request would require a future land use amendment. It would change the site from conservation management to moderate scale residential. Or sorry, I misspoke, from private open space to moderate scale residential. And here's the map with the site on it. Again, the deadline for action is November 25th. If there are any questions, I can take them.
Thank you. We probably will have them for you later. But moving on now to public comment. With those in support, the applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
All right. Move the mic up here. All right. Good morning, Planning Commission. Again, Toby Coleman, 150 Fayetteville Street, here on behalf of the owner of the property, Gorman at 40, as well as the potential affordable housing developer for the site, which is Kelly Development. Here with me today out in the audience is Ted Hilbrun with Kelly Development, as well as Chris Bostick with Kimley Horn, who's the civil landscape architect for the project. I'm going to go through, Margaret did a great job of sort of outlining the issues. This is obviously a site with some issues and where there's going to be some balance of concerns about conservation and concerns about, as well as the opportunity for affordable housing. So here is the proposed rezoning, as Margaret noted, is to facilitate affordable housing. As Margaret noted, it would be primarily, it would be only for affordable housing. The zoning condition allows for income averaging up to, with a target of 60% AMI or less. Ted can speak to this in more cogent detail if there's questions, but it would be a mix of units with some being at as low as 30% AMI and potentially some being as high as 70% AMI to basically average out the incomes. You can see here, let's see, this is the 100-year floodplain line. So the buildings would be built outside of the 100-year floodplain and sit well above the floodplain. The floodplain is about 300. The Gorman, where the properties would sit, is at about 330 here. And the plans would develop about 138 units as shown here, and would require disturbing about half of the 17.5 acre site. We did take this to West Raleigh CAC, and they voted 6-0 to recommend approval. So just wanted to note that. We recognize that this is not consistent with the future land use map. We will note that there is consistency with sort of how this area has developed. So the background here is that back in 1974, around the time that Lake Johnson, this area around Lake Johnson was annexed into the city, about 2,000 acres around Lake Johnson was rezoned to what was called sort of conservation buffer. And it was enacted at a time when there weren't yet the Neuse River buffer rules or a lot of strong environmental protections related to development. The idea was to sort of, through the zoning, do that. And so the idea was to have sort of a density exchange where you could develop on the higher areas and protect the lower area and bottom areas. You can see sort of how that works. This project to the south has this sort of amoeba-like zoning, similar apartments here across the street. So that's sort of the idea, as you saw here, that we're sort of proposing here. One of the questions that we've heard, and I know that there's been concerns at from Council and Planning Commission about development of housing and affordable housing on properties that have some 100-year floodplain on it. This map shows sort of how the houses would lay in comparison to the 100-year floodplain. What we'll note is, I think what's important here is there's numerous market rate apartments in this area. We asked the city specifically, has there been structural flooding reported upstream or downstream of this site? And the answer was no. And a large part that's because we're between two flood controlled lakes, Lake Johnson and Lake Raleigh. Here is just sort of to give you a sense on sort of how it sits with the 100-year floodplain. It's hard to see, but what you see here is, again, so I misspoke, I said 330. Gorman Street is at 320, so you have a finished floor elevation about 321. The Greenway sits at 299. The floodplain, I think, sits, 300-ish. So you get sort of a sense of how this would lay out. Again, one of the things, and just sort of as background here, this Planning Commission, some of you have seen some of these cases, some of you are newer, but this Planning Commission has heard two prior market rate cases for this site. One was for apartments, I think back in 2015, 2016 timeframe. Another was for single-family homes in the 2020 timeframe. Both of those obviously didn't go anywhere. And so when we started looking at this case, we knew that we would get asked why here. And what we sort of said was, well, if it's going to be something, it's going to be affordable housing, and because of the need for it. You can see there some of the examples. This is a case where, because in fact it's so hard to develop privately, it's cost effective. It's a rare site where a market rate or affordable housing developer could actually develop and buy the site. and it has sort of everything that a affordable housing developer would want. It's got access to amenities, it's in a central location, and it's got access to nature. Here's some of the concept renderings just to give you a sense of what we're talking about. As Ted likes to say, the goal here, their goal, Kelly Development's goal, is to make it so that you wouldn't know driving by that it's affordable, that the only thing that tells you it's affordable are the rents. Again, I just want to underline, this is part of the reason why we're pushing on this. We recognize that it's not consistent with the future land use map. It's no news to y'all, but this is from the city's website. Affordable housing is a critical need. That's why we're proposing this. Here's a map. This is a map from the city's website. It shows where city-funded affordable housing has occurred since 2016. The Gorman site's here in purple. Basically, I think the story tells, the picture tells the story, which is there really hasn't been any affordable housing development on this side of the city. And there's a serious need. The updated affordable housing study from Housing and Neighborhood Development is going to indicate that about 29,000 low and moderate income renters spend more than 30% of income on rent, which is what you're, sort of the line of affordability. And there's a huge need. The shortage is currently 21,000 rental units, and it's estimated to go up to a need of 31,000 affordable rental units by 2025 for people making about 60,000 and under. Related to that is just, there is an increase in homelessness, and there's 20 active homeless encampments around the county, as of the last point in time count from the Raleigh Wake Partnership to End and Prevent Homelessness. I only mention that because those don't just happen like right in downtown. They happen in treed areas around the city, and so we're trying to sort of find a way to balance it here. And unfortunately, if things continue the way we could, you could see things happen in a not so planned way, I guess I'd say. We are here today. We recognize that there's some work and some conditions that need to be added. We've been talking with Councilor Harrison and other council members about this. The truth of the matter is because this is affordable housing, it's going to be funded by low-income housing tax credits. We're on the clock. In order to qualify for the 4% tax credits, we need to get rezoning approval by the first meeting in January. I've been telling people, and I think people have been very kind in saying that doesn't sound like a long time to me, but I know it's 3 months from now, but given the timeline of getting to council hearings, that's not very long. And we've had some indications that council is going to want to spend some time and multiple meetings on it. So we are working and exploring additional conditions. And frankly, we've started writing up new conditions, but it's in the sort of within the 10-day, after the 10-day window. So that's why it's not before you. We would request that rather than sort of keeping us at Planning Commission, that you refer us out and recommend, if you want to, that there be additional conditions. We're looking at additional stormwater mitigation. We're going to have a condition about providing stormwater easements. We're going to have a condition about higher tree conservation areas. Again, we don't have that in front of you, so technically you can't consider it, but those are all recommendations we would be fine with. We're going to add conditions that say no development of buildings or parking areas in the floodplain. We're going to have a condition that says you can't put buildings within or other development within 100 feet of the top of bank of Walnut Creek. So we're really working on a bunch of conditions, and there's some other ones we're talking about. But if you all said that list, that would be the list we'd be ready to give as soon as staff said, yes, you can give us a new signed set of conditions. And with that, I'm available for questions. I just hit my 10 minutes, so sorry for talking so much.
Thank you. Just so I can get a sense, are there any other members of the public here who would like to speak in support of this project? Just to clarify, you're here in support of the project?
I am.
We are out of time, but given that the applicant took all of it without objection, I would like to, and there's only one member of the public, is that correct? Okay, without objection, I'd like to add an additional 2 minutes of time to both sides.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Planning Commission. My name is George Jones. I am the Executive Director for Partners for Environmental Justice. We've been an organization here since 1995, and we've worked very closely with communities and residents within those communities operating within the floodplain, living within the floodplain of Walnut Creek and the watershed area. I'm here because we've had a chance to submit a letter. That letter should be available to all of you. You may have seen it. We sent it out yesterday. Unfortunately, it was kind of at the last minute, but I just want to address a couple of priorities that we are thinking through in this effort of support. One is Walnut Creek is currently classified as a degraded body of water. It's not only listed with EPA, it's also listed as one of the highest flood-prone areas in North Carolina. And so that degradation concern is one that I want us to make sure that we address. It's listed as an impaired, highly flood-prone property or watershed. The site is also located in a documented environmental justice community per Wake County, North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, and EPA. But there are other factors here, and the Toby, actually, I know his first name, I'm losing his last name here, but he's made reference several times about the affordable housing and how much of the affordable housing in Raleigh is highly concentrated in Southeast Raleigh or Northeast Raleigh. And so this property falls outside of that. But because of these factors and other factors, we believe above and beyond that it's important that green stormwater infrastructure and other equitable development projects are, I'm going to hit stop, but are being utilized in this process. And I know that that information has not been presented, so we do have some concerns, and we would like to maybe readdress those concerns once we've seen those things listed. We look forward to working with you as well as the developer in making sure that there are solutions focused on equitable development and improvements to green infrastructure for this project.
Thank you very much. And we do have a copy of your letter as well that we have received and will take under consideration as well for this project. Thank you. Moving on to those in opposition. Those opposed will have a total, in this case, of 12 minutes to speak. Thank you, and please introduce yourself at the podium as well.
Good morning. My name is George Callahan. I live pretty much adjacent to this lot in an apartment complex on Lake Dam Road, between Lake Dam and basically where this lot is going. I have lived there for 7 years. And I think in the year 2023 in Raleigh, North Carolina, this is not a forest that should be cut down, disturbing 9 acres as was put. This is a 100-year floodplain, and there are issues with building houses above floodplains because of stormwater retention. My apartment complex has flooding issues. I can show you documentation of, communicating with my management company. I took a picture this past weekend of ankle-deep water just outside my door. During Hurricane Matthew, between Trailwood and Avent Ferry, which is a stone's throw from the edge of this proposed development, there was thigh-deep water. The greenway had to be closed. Sediment had to be removed after the stormwater cleared. And one other storm last summer along Lonnie Pool Golf Course, which is downstream of this, there was shin-deep water as I tried to bike. So flooding is absolutely an issue, and I will absolutely start reporting it. Another issue is that this is right next to NC State. We are seeing not right next to, it's about a mile away from, but there's a lot of students in this area. A lot of cross-country club teams and athletic teams use this area at a time when Mental health on college campuses is a huge issue. I think that, removing a extremely shaded corridor of Greenway, that area, if you walk that Greenway toward Gorman Street, as soon as you cross into the sun on a summer morning, it's, 7 degrees warmer according to the Wake County tree canopy assessment. And this area is also in a U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development low-income census district. It's one of 22, I believe, in Raleigh. The Walnut Creek flows through 9 low-income housing districts. Just around this area, there are 5 low-income apartment communities. I don't believe that they are subsidized, but they are low-income. I live in one of them. And it flows through 9 low-income housing districts. 9 acres of trees removes each year from the air 95 pounds of dust, soot, and other particulate matter like pollen from the air, along with 500 pounds of ozone, nitrous dioxide, and carbon monoxide. That's according to the Wake County tree canopy assessment. So basically, we're upstream of 9 federally designated low-income housing areas, low-income census tracts, and every year we are going to dump 95 pounds of dust, soot, and other particulate matter into this creek. Walking through this area, I talked to a lot of people 2 weekends ago who had no idea that this was happening. Low-income communities are not represented well in politics, but local issues. The small signs that were placed around the 5 apartment complexes in this area were not enough to have good representation. But living in that apartment complex, I have lived next to single moms, single dads, service industry workers, college students, people in between jobs, and I know how much people value this greenway, this shady stretch of greenway, access to nature, and with 21,000 units of affordable housing needed in Raleigh, I don't know that 140 units is worth cutting down these trees because of everything I mentioned. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak in opposition to this project? Seeing none, I will bring this back to the table. Questions and comments for commissioners. And I want to just start off by asking the applicant just to clarify about timing. In order to have this project even be possible for LIHTC application purposes, would that require, from your deadline purposes, this case being voted out by the Planning Commission today?
From a practical perspective, we think so, because for 2 reasons. One is that if we got voted out today, the earliest, because frankly, if this gets reported out to council at their next meeting, the earliest that they would schedule us for a public hearing would be the first meeting in November. We don't anticipate that we would get voted on at that meeting. We've also talked extensively with Councilmember Harrison, because this is in her district. This may get referred to Growth and Natural Resources Committee. That meets once a month at the end of the month. We're a little concerned that if we don't get voted out now, that there wouldn't be time to be heard, because I'm not sure if GNR is going to meet in November and December because of the holidays, frankly. So that's our concern from a timing perspective. We don't want to rush you. I would not do this if this were a market rate deal. It's really those set of unique circumstances.
Thank you very much
Yeah.
for that clarification. And just as a reminder to the commission, I believe we have 4 options today. We could either hold it at the table, we could vote in support, we could vote in denial, or we could vote it out with no recommendation to council as well. Thank you. Commissioner Lamon.
Just as another disclosure, my organization provides equity support to low-income housing tax credit developers. I had a conversation with David York about this particular applicant. They are not a current client. And the applicant did reach out on the attorney side. However, I did not engage. And so I'm hoping to still participate in this case if David York says one way or another.
Well, it's the board's decision and your decision, but I think you haven't indicated anything that would require you.
Into the mic, please. Into the mic, please. Your legal opinion. Thank you.
Come on, David.
One of these days. Jeez. The decision rests with you and the commission, but you haven't indicated anything that would suggest you need to be recused.
As I turn to my fellow commissioners, does anybody have any concerns with me participating in this case today?
I do not. And in fact,
Thank
I would
you.
welcome your expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yes, Commissioner Fox.
I have a question for the applicant. Can you pull up the page in your presentation where you had bullet points, there you go, of considerations for additional conditions?
Oh, yes. There you go.
There we go. Okay. Quick question about the conservation easement. Are you contemplating a conservation easement as defined through the IRS tax code?
I don't think we've gotten that far with it, and so that's a good question. We'll have to look at it. What we've really been thinking about, frankly, Commissioner Fox, is when would the timing of the granting of the easement be for the purposes of development? Because we're a little concerned that we don't want to grant an easement and get tripped up by like TCA, like you can't put TCA in conservation easement. So we haven't gotten that far, but if there's a concern about the IRS code, we'd be happy to take a
There
look at
is. It can't actually be a condition if you are considering contemplating that process.
Okay.
It has to be a voluntary act
Okay.
to create a conservation easement. Then my other question is, I guess, getting into some of the specifics of your third bullet point.
Sure.
Have you considered limiting all development in the floodplain, including limiting fill, as recommended by stormwater staff?
Yeah, yes. And we've got yes, that's what we're going to propose. We'll add in something. I don't know if we specifically said fill, but I'll add that. The only thing that we would ask, and sort of looking at how this has been done previously, I think the only exceptions we would look for are things like the ability to put approved utility lines, greenways, sidewalks, approved, basically approved public facilities, things like that.
Okay. Given those answers, and I'm also going to restate the obvious here, we are being asked to evaluate the trade-off of a project which proposes 100% affordable units versus the protection of an environmentally sensitive area. So per your layout of the options we have before us, I'm personally in support of recommending voting this out with no recommendation, but having some outlay of some conditions for council to consider related to stormwater mitigation measures and limiting fill and development.
Thank you very much. Any other questions and comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Peeler.
I think one other thing that hadn't been mentioned yet is just the parks and open space aspect of this. It is on the Greenway, as the gentleman who spoke in opposition mentioned. Right now, it looks like the conditions show a private access to the Greenway. I'd personally love to see that be public, and since it is a public greenway, and this would be low-income affordable housing, and I think also, in addition to what we're talking about, tree protection, the inclusion of some kind of public open space, and I would emphasize public there, would be something I would, and obviously I think we're talking about voting this with no recommendation. So I just wanted to put that in the open.
Thank you. Good notes. Commissioner Bennett.
I feel like you were looking at me before I even raised my hand. So I spent some time on this one. I think everyone knows the ones that Nicole's going to spend time on. So I spent a lot of time with this one. I have been very critical in the past of development specifically for affordable housing in or around floodplains. I'll say that. After hearing the presentation and reading the staff report and looking at the conditions that you are considering, I feel more comfortable with this one. I do recognize the importance of preserving these natural areas to the extent that we can. I also recognize the importance of affordable housing, particularly in areas where we're lacking it. That map that you put up, Toby, was pretty impactful. And so to the extent that we can disperse affordable housing in areas that still are rich in amenities like transit and employment and shopping and education and greenway and the lakes and green space, it seems like this area has everything. I would be comfortable. And also, I've also in the past expressed concern when applicants ask us to like rush a recommendation. However, we have done it for market rate housing. So I would certainly consider your time constraints for a 100% affordable housing development, rezoning, given the conditions that I just mentioned. And have you already spoken with Partners for Environmental Justice, or are you planning to?
We had a really good conversation outside. We had been trying to set up a meeting. I think we had been corresponding last week, and I think we've had a really good conversation. I think we're talking about working together to try to figure out some of the issues around, frankly, stormwater quality. I think, as I mentioned, we're committed to doing stormwater mitigation at a pretty high level. 100-year stormwater or 100-year flood sort of, or 100-year storm mitigation. One of the issues that George raised in our conversation was we also want to see you be thoughtful about how you mitigate basically what's in the water, what's coming out of the mitigation, out of the ponds. And so we're going to talk more about that and try to figure out how we can craft something that they think works and that sort of thing.
Okay. Given that, and given that you are continuing to work on conditions and you're continuing to work with stormwater and you're continuing to work with Partners for Environmental Justice and staff, I would be comfortable voting this out, actually with a recommendation. I don't like no recommendations, like a tie. I would be comfortable voting this out with a recommendation, given that you are considering all of the conditions that we have discussed.
Yes, Commissioner McCrimmon.
I just have to go on the record to say this. In my previous role, just seeing the devastation of the 100-year floods that has impacted communities, and knowing that we need and we have a shortage of affordable housing in our county and our community, this is a rush project and this is before us, and knowing that this has to be settled, and having communities that we have people that need somewhere to live, but put them in situations that could potentially be flooded. Having the gentleman who stood before us saying that he had shin-deep water, and you're already putting folks in a situation that could potentially going from unhoused to housed, and then may lose their housing again in water. As the Commissioner just said, we have to have parameters, and we have to have plans in place. If there are situations where you are flooded, what happens? Where's the backup? How do we ensure that there is something in place that these folks are taken care of? Again, I'm happy to make some type of recommendation with a plan, because we cannot put these people back in the same situation again. So I have to go on the record. I have to speak up. I have to say something. I cannot sit back and not say something. So I'm on the record. I said it. I'm done.
Thank you. Commissioner Otwell?
Thank you, Chair Miller. I'd like to point out that this proposal is a request for just about 18 acres, and the Walnut Creek watershed in which we're concerned about is around 30,000 acres. So the overall impact of this site to the flooding problems that are absolutely an issue in the Walnut Creek watershed will be very minimal. I think that the proposed conditions largely prevent danger to flooding directly to these units in question. They're likely to be sited well above any floodplain, 20 feet above the floodplain, I think, is what I was able to interpret. And so I don't see this as an issue of flooding directly impacting these potential residents, but rather the stormwater that adds to the Walnut Creek problem. And I'll note that it's directly upstream from Lake Raleigh. So that is a lake that was constructed to limit floodwater and capture a lot of that runoff. And that's upstream of the properties that were noted in the PEJ letter, Rochester Heights and Rose Lane and Dacian Road. Am I saying it right? Dacian Road. These communities would be largely protected by the mitigation that Lake Raleigh provides from an impact that this site has. I think with the inclusion of the conditions that have been proposed, especially the 100-year stormwater, the 100-year storm runoff protections, I'd be happy to support a recommendation to recommend or to vote out without a recommendation at this point.
Thank you. Commissioner Lampman?
Would the applicant be able to share their map again and their design, footprint design?
Absolutely.
One of the things that I think is unique to this process as well from a LIHTC perspective is that when it comes to application time, site plan essentially is due at the time of application. So I think one of the benefits that will aid the Growth and Natural Resources Committee would be a full site plan. I assume that there are engineers on the project as well who are looking at the site in tandem with the architects, or if it's
That's
not the
correct.
architect as well. I think any information that you have that will be able to show what the site plan impact would be on this, being that you have to do it anyway for the application. So I think all of that will be helpful. I think taking into consideration the natural resources and any potential flooding is also something that the state agency will also review in tandem with the application. So I think that those are things that you're going to have to be looking to mitigate anyway, and any preparation for the Growth and Natural Resources discussion, I think, would be a value add to that. So I think that that's just a unique situation with LIHTC. You can have the fully developed site plans, which is not something we typically get to see.
Thank you. Commissioner Hafer?
Thank you, Chair Miller. I think this is a great opportunity. I think it's a great project. I might surprise some people, but I'm going to follow the lead of my fellow commissioners, but I just want to go and say that while I agree with Commissioner Bennett, we have rushed some projects through. We also have kept many at the table not to be rushed through. And I'm just a little surprised that this is a conservation management zoning, and the proposed conditions that came forward spent a lot of time on affordable housing, which is critical, 100% support, but there wasn't really a lot of thought in mitigating, they're asking for an upzoning, mitigating the CM zoning. And so I'm hearing from the applicant, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. I totally believe that, but I also believe that we're putting decisions into the hands of City Council, and I think some members of this board who've on this commission have seen that while we spent a lot of time on some cases we send it forward to city council, and they go in a completely different direction. So I might even go out on a limb and say, if we spent some time here with thoughtful conditions, you might actually have less time in GNR. All that being said, I'm going to follow the lead of my fellow commissioners, but I do have some concerns about that.
Thank you. I share some of those concerns as well. As a commissioner and in general on rushing projects, I know that generally when we have conditions coming, but they have not yet been submitted, we're voting on the case that we have in front of us. So while I very much appreciate the changes that are likely to be made in the future, since we cannot review them, I personally would be more comfortable voting with no recommendation, similar to Commissioner Fox in this case. Any other questions, comments from commissioners? Commissioner Bennett.
I'm happy to support the no recommendation if that's the comfort level of the commission. However, I do want to go on the record. As someone just said, maybe it was Chair Miller, the council's going to do what council's going to do regardless of what we say. Let's be honest. That has happened many times. We've spent a lot of time on some projects, many hours on some projects, nightmarish flashbacks on some projects, and council has done what they want to do. So I think we do the best we can here at this table. We make our recommendations and it goes to council, but I don't think we need to fool ourselves that if we spend 3 meetings on this and craft recommendations, that council's going to be beholden to that, because they are the decision makers. We're just the advisory body. So if it's the will of the commission in order to move this along that we do no recommendation to get it to council, then I'm fine with that. But in my opinion, I don't know that we're advising anything when we give them no recommendation. But in order to move it along, I'm happy to support the rest of the commission.
Thank you very much. And in the motion, we also can include specific small R recommendations for council related to details that we hope that they consider as well, and sort of a roadmap in that way. Commissioner Peely?
Can I ask Mr. Coleman another question? What application deadline we were talking about for LIHTC, when is the next one? Is it a year from?
Okay. Yeah, it would be January 2025 is what Ted is telling me. I can get him up, but I think Commissioner Lampman's nodding her head, so I think that's correct. I'm always nervous whenever I get into technical details with Commissioner Lampman up here. Just to be really clear, I actually emailed her and I said, I'm going to talk about a LIHTC project. I would like to talk to you about it before I get in front of it so that you don't have to correct me at the dais.
I'm definitely still learning on it too, but I guess maybe what I'm actually asking is, like, can it not be heard till January 2025, or when would it actually be?
It could get rezoned before January 2025, but the project wouldn't get approved for financing until January 2025.
So you would not hear back for another year? They only respond once a year? Is that?
I mean, I think technically they have to have all their zoning approvals by May, but in order to get some of the entitlements and getting the site secured, they have to have that occur before January. They have to have essentially a viable site with site plans, and essentially they're spending money currently to invest in this application timeline.
Yeah, they've started the pre-application process. I believe they've submitted the pre-application in the last few weeks, in fact.
It's kind of what puts your hat in the ring to participate.
So it's like a yearly response,
Correct.
Basically. They don't respond as they
For
get.
this particular version of the program, correct, it's January.
Okay.
Just some other technicals, along those lines too. In the rezoning application, if this is looking for average income to kind of I think, because it says 60% AMI here, but I think you're going up to 70, which I think is something that the city needs as well. Also, I believe that the agency will restrict the number of units to 120. However, I understand that, the underwriting itself may vary in that as well. So again, anything that's as close to final application that can go through for the growth of the natural resources, I think would be beneficial.
If I could, I don't want to overstep my bounds. I do appreciate the concerns that have been expressed. One of the reasons why I listed out the conditions that we are working on, I have them, and I'm happy to send them to any of you that want, because I come in front of you all a lot. I am not here to try to do a bait and switch. What we're saying we're going to do, we're going to do. I appreciate Commissioner O'Haver's concerns and thoughts, and yeah, if I had it to do over again, I would have done it 10 days ago. I apologize for that.
I do think that the discussion at the table is always helpful to the council as well, so I don't think it goes completely unheard, but.
Thank you. Commissioner Peeler?
If we were to, I mean, either way we go, whether we move to recommend or no recommendation, and maybe this is a question for our deputy city attorney, but what about amending the motion to put in language about, because I think we talked about this a little bit, about, you know, we're setting forth this recommendation under the idea that council will see certain conditions, or not even, you know, we wouldn't outline them specifically, but yeah.
I think we perhaps could, and there might be a commissioner who's ready to make such a motion as a good segue. Is that correct, Commissioner Fox?
Given that there are competing policy interests related to the provision of affordable housing and the protection of environmentally sensitive areas, I motion to send this to council with no recommendation and ask the applicant to further consider additional conditions related to additional stormwater mitigation, limiting development, including fill in the floodplain, additional tree protections, and the provision of public open space.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Bennett has seconded. Any further discussion or debates on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor by show of hands? Any opposed? Just to verify, Commissioner McCrimmon, did you vote in favor or opposition?
I'm debating.
Okay. Are we allowed to abstain from a vote?
You have to cast a vote either yes or no. You can't abstain.
Reluctantly, I vote yes.
Okay, thank you. I understand that. Okay. In that case, that motion passes unanimously, 9-0. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to item E5, jumping back in order on the agenda, to rezoning case Z2223 at Trailwood Drive. This case is to change approximately 11.3 acres from planned development with special residential parking overlay district to R6 with special residential parking overlay district. And the deadline for action is November 25th. We'll now turn to Bronwyn Reedus for a presentation from city planning staff.
Thank you. Bronwyn Reedus with Planning and Development. Again, this is a rezoning request of approximately 11 acres along Trailwood Drive. The request is to change from PD planned development to R6 residential 6 with conditions. Conditions were submitted within that 10-day deadline to be able to make it to this meeting, but I will note that the notification for this meeting was completed before those conditions were submitted. Again, deadline for action, November 25th. So the current zoning on the site is planned development. That zoning comes along with a prescriptive master plan and site plan that has very specific development details that come along with it. That master plan was included in your backup materials, so you've got it, and I'll pull it up on some slides in a minute. But zoning in the area is a good mix. This is actually really nearby to the case that you all just considered. It's actually just a little bit east of that. So you have the conservation management surrounding Lake Johnson to the east of this, or west of this site, Centennial Campus to the east, and then various different residential densities. Again, just a look at the aerial image showing the proximity to Lake Johnson and Lake Raleigh. have some commercial uses up along Avent Ferry Road at the intersection of Avent Ferry and Gorman. And taking a closer look at the site, just highlighting there is the Walnut Creek that borders the northern property line. There's an existing built-out greenway along that northern property line as well. And then again, you have that floodplain and floodway to consider as well. Here are some views of the site from Trailwood Drive. The site is completely wooded today except for that existing greenway. And in photo number 1, you can see where that greenway intersects with Trailwood Drive. So the applicant has proposed 2 conditions. The first is to limit development intensity to 40 residential units and commit to the construction of a private multi-use path that connects the future development to the existing greenway along the northern property line. And here's an exhibit that was provided by the applicant showing the conceptual future development and connection to that existing greenway. This is about 400 linear feet. So the existing zoning with the master plan and the site plan that comes along with that has a maximum of 12 single-family detached lots. So that's the existing maximum. The proposed zoning would kind of release the site from that master plan with the planned development, and it would now be limited by that zoning condition number 1, which limits the number of units to 40. Here's a look at the master plan that is associated with the planned development zoning today. Again, 12 single-family detached larger lots. So the request does score higher for most of our transportation indicators, indicating that development on this site would likely advance the comprehensive plan's visions and goals for connected, multimodal, and low emission development. Access to transit is pretty good in this area. The nearest transit stop is going to be about 500 feet away along Avent Ferry Road. So the request, again, it does increase the number of units that can be built here, increases the variety. So going from single family only to allowing for some attached types. It does not include any subsidized units, however. This area has, it's less diverse, but more low-income earners are located in this area than the citywide average. Rental costs in the area are increasing at a similar rate to the citywide average. So there is a housing demand in this area. The requested zoning district of R6 is consistent with the low-scale residential future land use designation. The site is within a frequent transit area on the urban form map. Because this is a residential district, we don't see frontages coming along with residential districts. Those go with mixed-use districts. But the request is consistent with the intent of the frequent transit area designation on the urban form map. So the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan overall, being consistent with the future land use map and the urban form map. There are a number of consistent policies highlighted here, looking at zoning for housing, transit infill, and then having that connection to existing greenway. And no inconsistent policies have been identified. So there are no outstanding issues with the petition. And again, your deadline for action is November 25th. I'm happy to answer any questions before you open up for discussion.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'll turn to the public comment next. The applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
While she's pulling that up, Mac Paul, 421 Fayetteville Street, here on behalf of Benita and Anuj Mittal. Over here. We also have Daniel Watley from Withers and Ravenel, landscape architect, who has focused on greenways and conservation issues. We also have Ted Van Dyke with New City Design, and we're going to show some 3D renderings, and I'll turn it over to him when we get to that. Obviously, you've seen the site. I think what's really interesting about this area, and there have been cases, if you've been on here for a while, you've seen them, particularly down Trailwood, concerns over student housing in this area, right adjacent to Centennial Campus. But it's not in the city of Raleigh. It's actually in the ETJ. It needs to be annexed. So you have a very interesting feel, rural area for folks who live down Trailwood, enjoy that seclusion. And a lot of it is in a neighborhood conservation overlay district. So the only properties that are not in an NCOD are these two properties and the one just to the south of it. And you've heard about the PD. I think it's there was a very noted architect, a modernist architect, maybe 15 years ago, who worked on this site thinking that there would be some individual kind of case study modernist homes built here, but it just didn't happen. What's you saw on this site, I mean, it's very constrained in terms of where you can build because of the topo. It does rise incredibly, as you can see from this topo map. Less than over 60% would be conserved because of the topo on this site. The owner has gone forward and done a no-rise study to show that to determine that the limits of development would not impact the floodplain. They did a tree conservation study to look at all the trees over 10 inch, and that's a very important thing for the community in this area. And met with staff a number of times, both on the Greenway, and those were really the main comments from the city. This just shows you the kind of the limits of development on this site. And so even when you go back to the PD, it's virtually, mimics this same kind of configuration. So some of the things we heard from the early meetings, we initially were considering RX3, only to give flexibility potentially to do a congregate care and potentially a fourth level townhome, which are kind of a popular form now. Neighbors were concerned about buildings that tall, so we went to an R district, which is limited to 3 stories, and are looking at either townhomes or multifamily, but the real development program is townhomes, as you can see from here, and the Greenway easement. So I'll just say the main focus of conversations that we've had are with the adjacent property owner and some other neighbors who generally, as I said, are very protective of the feel of this area. And this is the tree planting plan we were asked to consider by the adjacent owners to plant. So there's some very mature tall oaks that run along the border, which is really fortunate because they're in a zone that can be protected. So the things we've been asked to consider are setback, natural protective area, tree planting, and lowering the heights of these buildings. This shows like what you could do under the current zoning with the grade. Single-family homes built, there's a 30-foot setback to the south. The owner has gone ahead and done with CAD drawings and based on the topography plans for these townhomes showing, it'd be several $100,000 for to kind of follow the topography of the site and put the retaining wall in there, leaving a 25-foot buffer. We are still having conversations. The owner is here, so you're going to hear from her momentarily about the nature of the tree plantings, where the tree plantings occur. There's also a desire for a fence or wall, which the owner is willing to do. And there's been conversations about the rooftop amenity and whether it can face to the south. The owner, I think, is willing to try to screen that as well. but we're not at any kind of final resolution in terms of that buffer area, and obviously here today to hear from y'all and your thoughts on it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ten Van Dyke just to kind of walk. One of the things we were asked by the neighbors is they really wanted to see what these could look like, and so there has been a lot of effort to do the renderings.
Thank you, Mac. Good morning, commissioners. Yes, as Mac said, this is sort of our conceptual plans that we've developed to illustrate more clearly how a development on the site would work. We are looking at a townhome development. What we've done, and I think this slide shows fairly well, is that because of the topo and the great deal of slope we have, we're trying to sort of bury our garages. So that lowermost level you see in those over here are actually where the garage levels would be, and then we'd have our 3 stories of townhome above that. Really, the top floor would just be some kind of rooftop amenity and maybe a home office or something like that, and that works all the way down the site. And so we've sort of been able to lower the effective visual height of these buildings while still maintaining a developable envelope and also working with the topo. Let's see what we've got next here. Here's sort of an aerial. This is looking from Trailwood, as you would, and the neighbors that we were discussing, I believe, are along here. But you can see how these nestle in. Most of the site, which is all of this, would remain undisturbed. I think Daniel from Withers has created an exhibit showing the limits of construction, but it's very similar to the slide you saw previously, which really keeps everything up and out of the floodplain. I think we're 30 feet or more above the elevation of the greenway and the creek down below us. So I think we're about 3.3 acres of development here on an 11-acre site. So it's sort of a cluster development concept. We're going to do our development on the top of edge of the site, stay out of the floodplain, stay out of the floodway, keep all of that natural. We'll get rid of these guys. See how we get rid of them anyway. Undo that one. Undo that one. There you go. This is sort of a view from the other way on Trailwood, and what we've tried to do on Trailwood is create a nice streetscape. You can see up here my little illustration. We get all those guys, get the sort of a frontage that we create, a nice streetscape. There it is again. So the long Trailwood, we're proposing hopefully a 10-foot multi-use path rather than the sort of new TC4 section. We feel like the multi-use path might be more appropriate here in the sort of quasi-rural feel that Trailwood has, and also connects directly to the bike facility, bike and ped facility of the greenway below. But we would have a nice row of townhomes addressing Trailwood with a nice setback, and then the multi-use path there. And the trees you're seeing on the lower right, these are aspirational. If we can get the multi-use path to work rather than the TC4 divided sidewalk and bike lane, we may be able to save some of the existing trees on the right-of-way. If we are asked to do something different, those trees would probably be replants and would be smaller than that. They'd be this large at maturity, but that would be a few years out. Here's just looking as you would enter the site, and you can see how we'd have our stoops and sort of front doors, and then down below here, as I was saying before, we'd have our entry to our garages to work with the topo, which I think you can see pretty clearly here. And this is looking the other direction on Trailwood. I think I was mentioning the multi-use path and the sort of the streetscape where we addressed Trailwood with our townhomes there. And I think that's our last one. Yep, that's our last one. I'll take any questions if you have any.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Moving on to, are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in support of this project? Seeing none, I will move to the opposition. Those opposed to this case will have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And please introduce yourself when you come to the podium. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your time today. I'm Madison Beard. I am the adjacent property owner to this project. We've been working and speaking with the owners and the developers and the lawyers many times, and I really didn't want to be here today. I really wanted to get to a place where we could support this project fully and make sure that protections for our property that we invested in and that we live in is protected in writing, and I feel like that's fair. So we've had many different conversations, and we want this property developed. We have lived in this area for less than 5 years, and this is our second time talking to you about different developments. Last one was an apartment complex, which was unanimously voted down by City Council due to the impact to Walnut Creek Greenway and the flooding issues that were talked about by my neighbor. The area right at the end of this road is the exact area that he was talking about where the water was waist deep. So we have a lot of flooding issues, and the Arden, which is the apartment complex across from this road, has contributed a lot to the silt and all of the things that have eroded Lake Raleigh. So we have a lot of concerns. We need written protections for our privacy and the property. So even though Mac talked about it a little bit, we need these things in writing before we can support any kind of development on this property. I appreciate the time, and I just would ask you to really make sure that they document these things in writing so that we can have the property owners and our community protected. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Seeing none, I will bring this back to the table. Questions and comments from commissioners? Commissioner Lampman?
Yeah, I remember this one coming in before as well. And I'm sorry, what parcel are you on again?
Yes. So if you go back. I think this one is more illustrative. I'm the adjacent property right there. So right above A and B. I don't know if I can do this. This is my house.
It's 1116 and 1126 Trailwood.
Yes, we own both of those lots and would love to, build a grandparent's home on our second property, which is this one right here, eventually when our parents get old enough. So.
Thank you. And I just wanted to clarify from your comments, you mentioned some concerns about flooding from a different apartment project. Mm-hmm. Is your primary concern for this project the written condition about privacy?
Primary concern is written conditions about privacy. Secondary concern would be the environmental impact and the degrading of our waterways. So this is where the apartment complex is.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Other questions and comments from commissioners?
Yeah, I have a question on the site plan. Just to the left of the top row of townhomes, there's an amenity area, and then just kind of to the bottom left, there's another one that says 14,000 square feet. Just curious, is that just going to be green space, or is there a particular plan for what that would be?
Good morning, Daniel Watley, 137 South Wilmington Street, and I represent landscape architecture and civil engineering on this project. Most of what we're sharing it looks very finished, but it is still very conceptual, and I think what you're referring to is like a main clubhouse with a amenitized stormwater pond right in the middle of the site, and so like a community amenity space of some kind. In pursuit of the 10% amenity space that we would want to achieve overall on the site.
Yeah, maybe that is what I'm referring to with the 14,000. Is the 7,728 square foot amenity area up to the upper left, is that also part of the?
So that's just essentially a bubble that we're carving out to say, hey, there's some really nice trees right here that can be saved, but maybe we provide some nature play, some benches, some just something to bring the community members to that space to use it for a more natural amenity.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that. Just knowing that and knowing, the natural area this is, I think on some cases like this recently, we've seen conditions put in for tree buffers that were explicit. And then also, just one other thing I noticed was the Greenway connector path, which is one of the conditions. I will sound like a broken record saying this, but I think it'd be great to see those be public, since they effectively connect a public greenway to eventually a public street. So, yeah.
Thank you. And doing a quick check on time, it's 11:08. We have a hard stop at 11:15, and we have to get through our reports. So we may have like another 90 seconds before we have to cut off this discussion. If anyone has any particular conditions or other items that the applicant might consider before the next meeting, that would be helpful to present at this time. Commissioner Bennett?
I was curious if the applicant had considered conditions to address the member of the public, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but she asked about conditions around privacy and environmental protection. Were there specific conditions that you were considering to address?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so like an exhibit with a tree planting plan to have evergreen, because it's mostly deciduous trees there, so it gets bare in the wintertime. Screening the upper amenity so it doesn't face to the south. The setback, the reason we haven't submitted those, we would have submitted them by now, but the neighbors are still, kind of digesting it, and we haven't gotten they definitely want the things I just mentioned, but there still may be more things. I think there are other things or more extensive setback, et cetera. So we just haven't come to like a definitive, this is the universe of conditions we want. And so we've continued up until yesterday having these conversations. So we kind of know the specific ones, we can commit to, want to get your feedback. Obviously this is going to go through, city council as well, things they're attuned to. But I just want to be clear, yes, we're willing to do.
Okay, thank you. I'll just say quickly too, there was mentioned by someone about a fence or a wall, or this is just me personally, to the extent that fences and walls are needed for some sort of engineering or environmental reason, I'm supportive. To the extent that we're using them to separate people from people, I'm not. So I just want to make that clear.
Thank you. And I agree. Other comments from the commissioners with respect to conditions before next time? Then seeing none, I anticipate we'll continue this conversation. I'd want to check from the applicant, would those ongoing conversations with the neighbors, would coming back at the October 10th meeting provide enough time to have those conversations and submit the conditions? It will? Okay, thank you. Then without objection, I will move this case and the remaining two items on today's agenda, rezoning case Z2423 and Z2623, to our October 10th meeting. Thank you, everyone. So if you're here about those, please return on October 10th. And if you're unable to return, please submit your comments to us over email, and we will take those under consideration when we make those recommendations. Thank you very much. Moving on to report of the chair. I have no report, but since Vice Chair Raines is excused today, I'll give a report of his committee. The Committee of the Whole will meet twice this week. There will be a special meeting tomorrow, Wednesday, September 29th, from 4 to 6 o'clock in these chambers to discuss the New Bern Station Area Plan and related rezoning cases and comp plan amendment. There will also be a Committee of the Whole regular meeting on Thursday from 4 to 6 o'clock, also in this building, but on the third floor. That should be indicated in the agenda. And I will note for tomorrow's special meeting, we need at least six members to achieve a quorum, and we have exactly 6 members confirmed as of 2 days ago. So if any of you have a scheduling change, please let us know as soon as possible. Thank you. Moving down the row. Any report?
None.
No report.
I'd like to thank planning staff, and Bynum and Ira and Rael for putting together the mapping tool that we asked for. And I've gotten a lot of use of it already, and I hope to use it some more. Thank you.
Infrastructure and Mobility Committee will be meeting on Thursday at 3, immediately before Committee of the Whole. As of this morning, we have quorum.
No report, but also thanks to staff and especially Bynum because I've sent you a lot of questions this week.
No report.
Nothing to report.
No report, thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to report of the Assistant Director.
I just have one, Tax Exchange Committee's not meeting, right? Mr. Mann, is it your intent for Strategic Planning Committee to meet? You have one item pending in front of you, which is that request from the commission to discuss affordable housing location policy, not just the map that is an expression of the policy, but the policy itself. Do you want to plan that for October or November? You want to connect with me?
I'll connect with you.
Okay.
Probably it'll be November.
Great, so stay in touch about that.
Thank you.
We'll see what kind of quorum we can work up.
So, Bynum, the Tax Change Committee meeting on the 18th of October?
I don't believe there's any business for the committee to discuss.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
And if that changes, we can say so at the October 10th meeting. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.